We're now going to look at the call orchestration shape, which is basically how you call one orchestration from another. So to do this, we'll actually need to have another orchestration. So let's just say, for instance, how are we going to make this sound practical? So in our little illustration here, we have this little section down here called Add PO to our system. So let's suppose that that's where we call another orchestration, and that orchestration is called Add PO. Okay? So right here, it says there are no available orchestrations to call. A callable orchestration is one that does not have an initial receive shape with its activate property set to true. Okay? So what it's doing, it's actually looking at all the orchestrations in the same project, and I believe all the references as well. So it's saying that I can't find any orchestrations anywhere in here that would fit this pattern. So we're going to have to go create our second orchestration now. So this is called Orc PO Demo 1. We're going to come up here and say Add New Item, Orchestration, and then we'll call it Orc Add PO. Now, when you call an orchestration, you can actually pass it data. And so over here on the orchestration view, you see here parameters, and properties actually just shows you the property window down here. Okay, so parameters, we can right click and add actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 types of parameters. You can actually pass ports, configured ports, messages, variables, correlation sets, or role links. So the two most common ones are going to be messages and variables. So that's what we'll deal with in this video. So if I'm going to add a purchase order, I'm going to need a purchase order to add. So I'm going to assume that whoever calls me is going to pass it to me. And so before I add, well, actually here's something you can do kind of neat. I could either define the message here, I could call it message in, and then I could go to the message types and search for schemas and all that kind of stuff. Let's just go ahead and do it. Select from reference to assembly. I go down here to PO schemas. I find I think it's the approved PO. Click OK. And anyway, went through all those steps to define that message. Now I'm going to delete it and show you the fast way to do it. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the other orchestration. So I'm going to look for ODX PO Demo 1. I'm going to go to the orchestration viewer there, and I'm going to find the message that I want to pass. And that's going to be the PO in. I want to copy it. I think it's the PO in I want. Let me actually, before we do this, let me make a quick validation here. So remember our logic. What if it goes down this branch over here where it's under $1,000? But remember, we still built the dummy PON here. Okay, so we do have a message approved PON even in the case of under $1,000. Okay, so we go to the viewer, orchestration viewer, find the message approved PON, and just do a copy. And then you can actually jump to the other orchestration, go to the viewer, and instead of pasting it under message, come up here and paste it under orchestration parameters. And then there you don't have to set all the same stuff you've already set before. And just to show you that we can pass a variable, let's find some variable. Or maybe our trace variable. Maybe since we already set the trace on or off in our main program, we want to pass that on down to our subprogram basically. So if so, we would need to pass actually the name of the trace file. And then we're going to go back to the add PO and we'll paste that here. And not only the name of the trace file, but the variable that tells us whether or not trace is on. So that's vtrace on. Go to add PO and paste that there. Okay. So now in our new orchestration here, we don't need a receive shape because we're receiving the message in our kind of like a linkage section or being passed as a reference variable, if that's the way you want to think of it. So now we need to do something here like maybe call a web service. So we haven't talked about web services yet, and that's not what the purpose of this demo is for, but let's put it here. Let's just put it like we did before, call system X. And then here we're going to do something. We're going to have we need a debug shape to know that we got here, okay? So we're going to copy one of our traces. We'll paste it here. And we'll make this trace 8,000 because we don't have any 8,000s in our other program. And let's just make sure that we actually display the message that we received from our calling program. And notice here XML doc has not been defined, so we can go back to our first orchestration and we can find XML doc here and we can copy that, and this will not be a parameter though, this will just be a variable. Okay, because we're not passing the XML document, we're passing the message. Then we're taking the message, moving it to the XML document, and then printing it out in our trace. And we never put this in every program, but we talked about this concept here of having the trace on flag, okay? So let's put that over here too. We only want to trace if trace is on. Okay? And other than that, there's nothing else I really want to do in this program. So we're just trying to illustrate how to call a program, and I don't have any specific things I want to do here at this point. So now we're going to go back here. We're going to go down to our call orchestration shape. We're going to double click it, and now a few minutes ago we got an error saying there were no orchestrations to call. Now you're going to get a list of all the possible orchestrations, and there's only one to choose from right now, and it's called add PO. And then what it's going to do is show you all the parameters that we just set up in this column. Then in this column, sometimes it guesses correctly, but oftentimes not. What it's doing here is saying vTraceOn is a Boolean variable. And so over here it says variables in scope. It's going to give you all the variables in your scope that have the data type of Boolean. And so if you don't correct these, you'd be passing the wrong flag. You would actually be passing vApproved to vTraceOn. So in this case I want vTraceOn to pass to vTraceOn. These names don't have to be the same. In my case they're going to be. I want to pass the trace file name. So in this case, these are all the string variables I could potentially pass. And then this one I want to pass, this is a list of all the messages that have the same the same approval PO format. And I want to pass the approved PO in. And so now we've set up our call. Also over here, you notice they all say parameter in right now. If I go to the sub orchestration, let me see if I remember this. Yeah, right there's a field called direction. And so you can have input parameters, output parameters, and reference parameters. So by ref, it's like passing by ref means that you can change the variable and pass the value back to the program that called you. And so that's the direction parameter. And even the message has that direction parameter. So when we go back here and we look at the call, it's basically giving you the parameter direction right here. And it's just kind of telling you that, oh, if it says the word out or reference, that means that you could actually be destroying your variable when it comes back. Not necessarily destroying, but updating your variable. Instead of just passing data to it, you can get data back from that little orchestration. So that's all we need to do. And before we test this, I just want to point out there's another shape here called start orchestration. And it looks the same way. Everything is the same. The only difference is call orchestration is synchronous, meaning that as soon as we hit this call statement, our orchestration will pause, and we actually wait for the other orchestration to finish, and then the control will return to the next line of our orchestration after this orchestration finishes. If you put a start orchestration statement here, that means to asynchronously start the other orchestration, and then your orchestration immediately continues and doesn't wait. And so what that allows you to do is kind of like multitask, multi-thread, run two orchestrations at the same time. There's an interesting pattern for that we may talk about in a future video. Okay, so we're ready to test. Before I try to deploy it, remember that before you deploy, you should generally check to make sure you don't have anything running or suspended here. So running is clear, suspended is clear, no suspended is not clear. So I'm going to terminate all these suspended messages, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to do my deploy. While it's deploying, I'm going to go ahead and restart my host. Okay, the deploy is still running. In the past, that's taken about 8 to 12 seconds usually. Ooh, and it failed. Failed to add resource. Okay, let's just check that out there. Failed to update binding. Let me read this again. Could not enlist orchestration, add PO. Okay, that's actually okay. I don't know why it says deploy failed. Normally when you add a new orchestration, it will just add it, and it says it could not enlist it. Okay, so we need to give it a little help. So we're going to go back here to applications, refresh, look at our purchase order application, look at the orchestrations there. Ooh, and that's bad. There's not any. So when it says the deploy failed, it really failed. Very interesting. So when it deploys, what it actually does, it undeploys the stuff that was there before, and then it starts trying to redeploy everything. And so this is the only error that we got. Okay, I went off the video for a while and did some research on this error, and it's never actually happened to me before. I found this blog, and it talks about when orchestrations don't deploy and what various people did to fix it, but none of them really seem to apply to my scenario here. I actually just closed Visual Studio and reopened it, and that did not, and then did deploy again. So one thing I'm going to show you is another technique. Is oftentimes we use this little error list here, which gives you a kind of a summary of the errors, but oftentimes the smart thing to do is actually look at the output window. So if we do here view output, let's go ahead and make this like almost full screen here. So notice at the very bottom it says 3 things deployed and 1 failed. So the 3 that deployed, if we go back and review my scenario here, we have PO maps and 2 schemas, and it's the only one that's failing is the orchestration. Okay, which that's important. And since the orchestration isn't deploying, I come over here and do a refresh, and there are no orchestrations. So if sometimes I've seen a case where you have to undeploy something, but in this case there's nothing deployed here to undeploy. If we go down to our schemas, you do see all our schemas here. Our receive location, receive ports, send ports are all the same as before. So now I want to try to analyze this file. It's kind of long, so you see here I go all the way back to the top, and we'll start going through this and see if anything shows up here. So I'm going to highlight some of these things for you. The first thing it did when I did a deploy was it rebuilds certain modules. So you can see here build complete, build complete, build complete. So there should be 5 builds. And there's a build complete, so at least 4 builds. And then it starts the deploy. And you can see this deploy command, you can actually run from the DOS command prompt if you want to. But it just runs it from within Visual Studio automatically for you. And you can see here's the 4 projects it's trying to deploy. And it's giving you the solution name over here. And then it's adding a resource, validating a resource, performing change request on type so-and-so, beginning pre-update operations, and it says assembly, PO schemas. It looks at the binding of the send port, etc., etc. I'm going to try to read through here faster. This is where he's actually removing the prior item. So in this case, PO maps was deployed, and now it's actually undeploying it. This is the name of my machine and my SQL server, and that's the name of the database where BizTalk is. It notices there's no orchestration started, removes the tracking profile, uninstalled, succeeded, and so on. So I'm going to go through this just a little faster here. It says here I deployed PO schemas. So PO schemas had 0 errors. And if I continue a little faster now, we see the second one was PO schema generated, it deployed with 0 errors. And then the next one is purchase order app. What's the application name? Let's keep going down until we see the uninstall. PO maps again. Let's see what we're doing here. Okay, and now it says PO maps was deployed successfully, 0 errors. So now the errors are going to start on this deploy, which is PO orchestrations. And keep scrolling down. So what it's going to do here, it's going to check the binding that you have on your old orchestrations so that when it undeploys it and redeploys it, it can reinstall your binding files. So it actually saves your binding here to a disk file called document settings, Neil Walters, application data, BizTalk server, deployment, binding files, and then it looks like a tilde, and then you have the full name of your orchestration, including the version and the public key token, and then it creates a binding file called binding file or bindinginfo.xml. Then what does it do? Then it does the deploy command. It says warning, assembly so-and-so depends on the following assemblies that must be installed in the GAC first. And it's referring to PO schemas, but that's already been deployed first. And then it says deploy succeeded. And then, what is it? Where does it go wrong here? So now it updates all these ports. Warning, orc add PO not found in binding file. And that's because it's a new orchestration. I know that. So it shouldn't really be an error. And then because it has all these errors or whatever, it actually rolls back. So that's why when I go over here to BizTalk admin and look for my orchestrations, none of them are there because even the ones that it deployed got rolled back because of this rollback command. Okay, so one of the guys on the blog had the following suggestion. He says you come up here and go to your project orchestrations, and the default here is something called redeploy. Okay? And redeploy, in the old BizTalk 2004, the default here was false, but the default is now true. And so what I'm thinking is that I guess when you add a new orchestration to an existing project, you're just going to have to redeploy it from scratch and not use the existing binding files, which means I'm going to have to rebind my first orchestration manually. So let's just give this a try and see if it's going to fix the problem. Okay, so this time we see 4 succeeded, 0 failed, 0 skipped. If we go to the errors, there are 0 errors. So in a way, that sort of fixed the problem. But now, let's go over here and refresh. And you can see now that both my orchestrations are not bound. So I knew I would have to bind my new orchestration. But if I go look at my old orchestration, go to Properties, Bindings, you see I've lost all my connections to all my ports. And so, you know, it's kind of like I hope I remember what they are, right? So luckily I don't have that many ports. So receive standard PO, that was my map demo in. Approve PO, this is an inbound port. So this would be the approved PO in. Then we had standard PO, that would be a send PO port. And that would be the one approval and no approval. So this is the one called needs approval, I believe. And this is the one that says auto approved, meaning nobody needs to approve it. And then we have to rebind to our host, and we're okay. And then we do a start. Cannot enlist orchestration. All orchestration ports must be bound and the host must be set. Okay, I thought that's what we just did. So let's come back here, properties, bindings. I believe the host is set, all ports are set. Oh, okay, this is another, sort of a trick. So when you have one orchestration call another, you have to do them in reverse order too. So before I can start the mother orchestration, I have to start the child or the baby orchestration. Okay, so now the sequence of how you start your orchestrations becomes very important. And there is another trick on how to call orchestrations called direct binding, and we will discuss that in an upcoming video. So I need to go to properties on my new orchestration, go to bindings, and see there's no ports here, but I still have to bind the host to the BizTalk server application. And then I'll start the child orchestration, or the call E, the orchestration that gets called. And now I think I can start the orchestration that calls the other orchestration. And now it's started. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video now. It's at 20 minutes or over, and we will actually test this in the next video.